we said that if anybody wanted to put where they were from and their details in the chat room, because we've now got 43 computer screens, which obviously means 43 plus anybody else who's sharing your computer screen. So that will take a long time to go round. So do put your, if you want to say where you're from in the chat and give your details, then please do so. But I'm just now going to introduce our speaker, Philip Nalpanis from St Paul's Church on the Hatfield Road here in StAlbans. And this idea came about because as the Methodist circuit, and there are 10 churches in our circuit, we've been trying to encourage everybody on the eco-church journey, and decided also Marlborough Road have just about got to bronze and kind of want to have a bit of encouragement to get on to the next one. And so basically we thought this evening was a chance for those who've started the journey to get more encouragement and to get as far as the gold perhaps, and for those who haven't started to be given the encouragement to start. And so I wrote to A Rocha, who run the eco-church movement, and asked if they could have a speaker. And the speaker I got sent was Philip. So he wouldn't have had to travel too far if we'd been in the physical realm. But as he's had just mentioned, he's had a bit of a tough time recently and has had hip surgery. So I bet he's very glad he is only in the virtual realm and not having to make any journey anywhere. Philip is a volunteer speaker for A Rocha, and he runs it's A Rocha who run the Eco Church Awards scheme. Philip's had an interest in environmental issues since his mid-teens, having done postgraduate research in meteorology, and has some understanding of the physics behind climate change, and hence he's taken a particular interest in this subject. In the last few years, he's been involved with Sustainable StAlbans, and I'm sure there are several churches round the screen here tonight. Obviously St Paul's, Marlborough Road, and other churches around the screen have also been involved in Sustainable StAlbans events in the last few years. And through this, Philip works with, through this, as well as his work with A Rocha, Philip's gained a wider appreciation of current environmental challenges, pollution, loss of biodiversity, as well as climate change. And also Philip's integrated his concern for the environment with his Christian faith and underpinned it with a biblical basis for caring for God's creation. I first heard about eco churches when I was in Reading, and one of my churches there was one of the first churches to get an award in that area of this country. And so I'm delighted that my own church here at Marlborough Road, we're progressing that. It's been a bit of a slow journey, but that's because lots of other things intervene. But we hope tonight that Philip will encourage us all on the journey, whatever stage we're at on the journey. Some of you might have got further than others, but we're here to be encouraged and to learn. And so now, without further ado, over to Philip for our talk this evening, Eco Church, What, Why, How?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction, Rosemary, and thank you everyone for turning out. It's great to have so many people. Right, let me try and share my screen and hope that this is all going to work right. Hopefully you can now see my screen. Okay, so Rosemary's introduced me very nicely. What I'd like to do first briefly is introduce the work of A Rocha, who, as Rosemary said, run the Eco Church scheme. And then I'll talk a little bit about what is Eco Church and then why I think it's a good idea to become an Eco Church. And then I'm going to talk about, well, very briefly, how you become an Eco Church, and but more than about that, how you progress environmental sustainability. I'll do that through actually demonstrating the Eco Church website, and in particular the survey that is at the heart of it. And I'll show you some of the other features as well, but not so much, not only to show you how that works, the website, but also to show the range of topics that are covered, which might well be more than you'd imagine. So, A Rocha, the actual name is Portuguese, and it simply means the rock. It was founded in Algarve in Portugal in 1983. And at that time, there were very few Christians who seemed to think that the growing environmental crisis had anything to do with them. And actually, very few environmentalists expected better of Christians. So, as a very small first step, the A Rocha Trust was set up. It was a UK charity, but it established a Christian field study centre at Cruzinha on the Alvor estuary in Portugal. And now, as this slide shows, it's an international network of environmental organisations, but with a distinctive Christian ethos. It's not just another environmental organisation or eco organisation. It does have a Christian ethos behind it. But it's not just doing its own thing, it's trying to engage communities in nature conservation. And recently, the last few years, it's really been picking up on the global crisis of biodiversity. Yes, they've also talked a lot about climate change, and biodiversity is something that overlaps with climate change, but as a conservation organisation, they've particularly been drawn to that. So they carry out community-based conservation projects through residential study centres, site-based projects, and wider advocacy. In other words, talking to the decision makers, speaking truth to power. So they're active now in 21 countries, So let's take that slide there. They're active in 21 countries around the world. And so you can see all the countries around the world where they're active. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the countries in Europe where they're active. So in the UK, they've got a number of projects going, a number of things they do. First of all, they run 2 nature reserves of their own. There's one in Southall, that's very much an urban, or a bit of, if you like, rus in urbe, countryside in the town, for those who don't know their Latin. That's in Southall, West London. And this picture shows their other nature reserve, which is Fox Earth, and that Meadows, and that's out in Essex. And the aim there really is to make nature available to a new generation of people who are disengaged from it. I think particularly young people, particularly children, perhaps they don't really realise nature, although hopefully in this last year, 15 months of lockdown, perhaps they've been seeing a bit more of nature. But also what A Rocha particularly want to do is reach out to the poor and the vulnerable. And I think Southall in particular is a very good place to do that, just so that people can enjoy God's gift of creation. They don't just work with their own reserves here, they also work with Christian landowners throughout the country. It's 17 sites at the moment, it's growing across the UK. This particular one is Lee Abbey in Devon, some of you may have stayed there. Hillfield Prior in Dorset is another one, and they've now got partners in action right across the UK. I can't remember if they've got one in Scotland, but I think England, Wales, and Northern Ireland certainly. Eco Church is another. I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail in a moment. Wild Christian provides a monthly email with tips and practical advice on how to care for nature in our home lives, what we can do at home for nature. And then something else called the Target 10 programme. And the intention is to increase the local population of at least 10 declining species in the UK. You might not recognise all these as declining. You might not even recognise all of them. But they all share some common attributes. They're in decline in many places, but they still occur across most of the UK, and they could show local increases quite quickly, given the right site management. And as you can see, it's birds, it's things that creep, it's small animals, hedgehogs and so on. insects and so on, and English bluebells. So that's A Rocha and what they're doing in the UK. So now I want to talk more about what is eco-church. Well, fundamentally, it's what it says here, and this is what it says on their website. It's their UK award scheme for churches in England and Wales. There's a separate scheme in Scotland. So churches in England and Wales who want to demonstrate that the gospel is good news for God's earth. And I think it provides a framework for churches who want to demonstrate that. I think it provides a very sound framework to work through to do that. I think it also helps and encourages churches to become more environmentally sustainable, but it does it without being prescriptive. You choose your own path through. And it provides an incentive to keep working at becoming more environmentally sustainable by working through bronze and silver awards, hopefully to gold award. But even then, it does more than that just within the church. It sends a message out to the community that you care for God's creation. And I believe it's a great tool for outreach to many outside the church, especially young people who are concerned about the environment. Now, it's run in partnership with the Methodist Church, as you see, and the Church of England, and another number of other charities and the All Churches Trust, who own the Ecclesiastical Insurance Group. So that's half a dozen organisations that it's run in conjunction with. But then there's about a dozen Christian missions and environmental organisations that also support it. So actually, its support at an organisational level is pretty considerable among the church in this country. So it's got quite a lot of street cred, really. It's not just a little thing happening in a little corner. So how does it actually work then? Well, basically, it's quite simple in a sense. Churches complete an online eco-survey. And so you register your church, and I'll talk briefly about that. You complete the survey about various aspects of your eco-profile. And the answers are scored, and they determine whether you've reached bronze award, standard, or even silver and gold. Now, I think the awards are helpful in giving you something to aim for and to keep you moving forward in environmental sustainability as far as you're able. So if on the first run of the survey you don't even achieve bronze, don't be disheartened. Look at where you're falling short and develop action plans to get to that level. I'll talk a little more about that later. So what does that survey actually cover? What's assessed? Basically 5 areas. And I think those areas comprehensively cover all aspects of the church's building, land and activities. And then lifestyle, the 5th one, focuses really on how the church's environmental goals impact on the members' lives. So it's mainly about what you do together and so on at the church and out of the church, but it also does impact on your members. I'll talk a little bit more about them in detail now, and then later on we'll look at some of these in more detail. So worship, I think that's got many definitions, but most of us, I think, understand it's far wider than just singing hymns or worship songs. For Eco-Church, it's about your gathered life, both in church and in small groups. In church, it covers your services, so your liturgy, what you sing, your prayers, your teaching, and your children and youth work. Buildings are probably the most obvious area where people think about environmental sustainability, especially with regard to climate change. It's about how much energy you use, but also about whether your energy is on a green tariff, whether different parts of the building are insulated and double glazed, about lighting, water use, even whether you generate your own renewable energy. Land covers various aspects of whether and how you manage any land you have, in particular to be wildlife friendly, which in turn feeds into the biodiversity agenda. Community engagement, global engagement, I should say, isn't just about reaching out with what you're doing, but also about cooperating with other like-minded groups, about getting stuck in locally, as well as participating in national and global campaigns and supporting actions such as toilet twinning. But it's also about whether, if you provide meals, you follow the loaf principles. That's L for local, O for organic, A for animal friendly, and F for fair trade. Obviously, not everything can be all of those, but probably all the ingredients can be some of those. And then lifestyle is really about what the church does to encourage its members to live more sustainably in areas such as travel, energy consumption, waste, repair and reuse, using food at home that follows the loaf principles I've just mentioned, and also ethical investment. Can I give a plug here for the event that St Paul's Church is hosting on Thursday? We have Alice Ross, who's Deputy News Editor of the Financial Times, talking about ethical investment. I think it's a real coup to have her speaking. And if you go to the SustFest programme, that's SustFest.org, you can find the booking details. Okay, so that's the what. Now the why. Let's go back to that. Now, I do think there are sound biblical reasons, so I'm afraid this is going to be a bit of a sermon, but I think as churches, this is where we have to start with the Bible. So I think there are sound biblical reasons in both the Old and the New Testaments for caring for God's creation. Let's start then in Genesis 1. Now, Genesis 1:28 is a verse that's often been used or perhaps misused because I think down the centuries, Christians have taken it as giving carte blanche to use creation for our own ends. It has words like subdue and have dominion. But actually, dominion isn't the same as domination. And I believe we have to look at this verse in context. So I've highlighted in red this context, and in particular, that we're created and intended to be God's image bearers on earth. So what does it mean to subdue the earth and to have dominion if we're doing that in God's image? Well, I believe it's to be loving, merciful, gentle, compassionate, as God is. And then in verse 31 of Genesis, we see that God says that what he's created was very good. So surely he wants us to keep it that way. Okay, let's turn on a chapter. Now, this is part of what most people recognize as being a parallel account of creation. Now, nice short verse, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. Well, the NRSV translates the word Hebrew as till, slightly different in other versions. But the Hebrew for till is a word, abad. And that carries the meaning of to work or to serve or even to worship. And then keep is a word, shamar, which, yes, keep is one translation, but watch is another, or preserve. So you could translate the verse like this. Sorry, I keep going too far. So you could translate the verse as this: the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to serve it and preserve it. Just take a moment to think about what this means for us. I think that puts a completely different complexion on our relationship with the natural world, doesn't it? It's no longer there to serve us, no longer ours to use for our own ends. Rather, we're to care for it, not only for our generation, but for future generations. Okay, so this was God's plan for humankind before the fall, but does it matter in our New Testament age? I'd like first to highlight a verse at the end of Mark's Gospel, Mark 16, verse 15. Here, Jesus commands his disciples to proclaim the good news to the whole creation. I don't know how often you read that verse. I've only recently sort of noticed it, but he doesn't say proclaim the good news to all people or all humankind, but to all creation. And the word there, the Greek word, definitely means creation. So the fall didn't just disrupt our relationship with God, it put the whole of creation and our relationship with it out of joint. That's in Genesis 3. I'm sure we're all familiar with. So Jesus' death and resurrection don't just provide the pathway for our relationship with God to be restored. They're the source of renewing our relationship with creation and of our restoring creation as God's image bearers to how God made it. Very good. So we can see this in some verses in Colossians. So I think verse 16 makes it clear that creation doesn't exist for us, but for Christ. So we're responsible to him for how we treat it. We've no right whatsoever to think we can use it as we please, let alone that this is God's command and purpose. Yet humankind has acted as though creation exists for our benefit, that its bounty is ours for the taking and using, in regard not only to climate change, but also pollution and loss of biodiversity. And then verse 20, it says that through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, not all people or all humankind, but all things. So I believe we have to understand this as extending to all of creation, as I mentioned just now. So the cross didn't just affect reconciliation between God and humankind. It had a cosmic impact, an impact on the whole of creation. Most churches focus on what Christ's work on the cross means for us. This verse makes it clear that the cross has a far greater and deeper impact and importance than simply reconciling us to God. As one commentator has put it, what's being claimed is quite simply and profoundly that the divine purpose in the act of reconciliation and peacemaking was to restore the harmony of the original creation, resolving the disharmonies of nature and the inhumanities of humankind. I love the way the message puts it. All the broken and dislocated pieces of the universe, people and things, animals and atoms, get properly fixed and fit together in vibrant harmonies, all because of his death. And then verse 20 also talks about reconciliation, which, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, means to restore to friendship or harmony. So how, in the context of creation, is this to be done? Well, in this verse in 1 Corinthians, talks about being God's servants or fellow workers. And the Greek word there is the word synergos. We get our word synergy from that. Sun means with, and ergos is about work. So sun, yes, it can mean with or together with or in association with. So we work in association with God to achieve his purposes. Let's turn that around. God works in association with us to achieve his purposes. So just as he works through us to bring people into a redeemed and reconciled relationship with God, so he works or wants to work through us to bring creation into a redeemed and reconciled relationship with himself, but also, since we're part of creation, with us. And then 2 Corinthians 5:18 says very clearly, God gave us the ministry of reconciliation. We're God's agents in this work of reconciliation. I find that awesome and amazing, but also a responsibility. Surely we who call ourselves Christians, should have a leading role in caring for and restoring creation as part of our calling. Just take a moment to think on that. There's another aspect to this too. We know, I'm sure, that Jesus quotes the commandment to love our neighbour as ourselves. When he does so, he's asked, who is my neighbour? And in response tells the well-known parable of the Good Samaritan. So who's my neighbour today? In this globally interconnected world, we should think wider than those whom we encounter in our everyday lives. Could be someone on the other side of the world, impacted by climate change because of our profligacy and greed, like this picture shows. So yeah, this is a dried up riverbed in Ethiopia, but this is the wet season. It should be flowing with water, not dried up like this. So I believe that becoming and progressing as an eco-church both challenges and enables churches and individuals to fulfill the biblical mandates I've set out. I think too, there are other good reasons for being an eco-church. I've already mentioned that it's missional. It's a great way to show our community that we care for the planet we share, and that that the good news is good news for the earth and not just for humankind, and that we share people's concern for the environment. And that gives us an entry point for conversation with them about the gospel in all its fullness. Now, you could become more environmentally friendly individually and as a church without eco-church. However, eco-church provides a framework. It covers different aspects of your buildings, land, and activities, including some you might not have thought of. There's also lots of guidance in each of these areas on the eco-church website, and I'll show you that a bit later. And you can get support from the eco-church team. Finally, as you work through the survey, you can see your score build up and whether you qualify for an award. It gives you something to aim for, but also it helps you to see which area or areas you're strong in and where you're weaker and could do more. So the areas to work at are highlighted by the survey. So maybe, as you know, there's a number of different churches represented here. It could even become a bit competitive. Right, so let's see how it actually works, how you can become an eco-church, but also progress environmental sustainability. So when you go to the eco-church website, yes, you can see there, I've ringed the actual website, ecochurch.arocha.org.uk. So you go to that website, web page, and then the next thing you need to do is register yourself and your church. Now, I shan't go into that process because I want to show you how the survey works. I know some people have struggled with registering. I'll show you later where you can find some guidance on that. So once you've registered and logged in, you come, hopefully, to the dashboard. This should be opening up the website and doesn't seem to be. It's all right, I'll do that manually. Right, okay. So it's loading the church details. This is once you've registered. This is a dummy church. It's called A Rocha All Saints, and it actually has the address of A Rocha's offices in West London. So what I'm going to do then is look at the survey. So what you do is you start the survey by clicking here where it says survey, assess your church, and measure your progress. Now you'll see any surveys that have already been started.
Philip, I don't know if this is the same for everybody else. But...
sorry, I know what's happened. I need to stop sharing and start again. Yeah. Sharing and share the screen with the website on. Is that right? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Are you now seeing the screen which shows 3 surveys?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, yes. I'd forgotten about that. I forget that every time I change from one screen to another in sharing, that I actually have to stop sharing and start again. So in this case, there are 3 surveys that have been started, but the one I'm going to use is the one I've started, and I'm going to continue it. And when you click on that, you see 5 categories, 4 you can see there, and then as I scroll down, you see the 5th one. And what you also see on this little bar here, for example, is your progress. And at the moment we're in the black and there's no award. And it tells us how many questions we've answered. And so we can see how much we've actually dealt with. And you'll see that there are different numbers of questions in each of the 5 categories. Now, we'll look at, in a moment, at worship and teaching. But what I want to point out also is that if you don't have your own building, for instance, I know some churches meet in schools, then you can say, no, we're not responsible, and you can simply click on that, and then you don't have to answer those questions. The same applies to land. If you have a building but no land that you have influence over, or all the land you do have is tarmac or whatever, then again, if you have no actual land that you could be doing anything with nature-wise, you can click on that one. Okay, so I'm going to take a sort of closer look at worship and teaching, then briefly at one of the others. Okay, so then you get a little bar at the top that tells you your score, and it tells you how many points you can get in this section. And the total possible score is actually different in each of the 5 categories, as is the number of questions. So let's look at a couple of the questions. So question 1, do you have any special Sundays related to caring for God's earth? They could be at formal times when the church looks at creation, or they could be any time. So we're having a sustainability service at St. Paul's this coming Sunday. And you can see it's not necessarily a yes/no answer. In this case, the answer could be at least annually, or less often, it could be never, or you may need to find out. So if I select at least annually, you can now see my score at the top goes up to 20. But if I select less often, it changes to 10. And as I say, if you don't know, you need to find out. So let's see if we can get up to bronze standard. I'm going to change that back to at least annually. And then if we go back to the list of categories, staying there, let's do another question. So we've answered question 1. We can move to question 2. This asks about the hymns and songs in our service enable us to celebrate God's creation. Slightly different set of frequencies here, at least quarterly, less often, never, or maybe not applicable. Can't think why it would be less applicable. So let's say less often, and that gets us up to 25. So let's have a look at question 3. Church prays for environmental issues, maybe occasionally. Oh, we've hit bronze. Basically, once you get up to 25% score, you hit bronze. If you get to 50%, it's silver, and for gold, it's 75%. So to actually get an award, you have to reach, for instance, to achieve bronze, you have to achieve bronze in all 5 of the categories. It's no good being gold in one category and nowhere in the others. You've got to score bronze in each of the 5 categories. So even with just 3 questions answered, the way I've answered them, we get bronze. Okay, question 10 I think is quite important. The leadership's made a formal commitment to improving the environmental credentials of our church by endorsing the undertaking of the work towards an Eco Church Award. Now, it's not essential to have the backing of the church's leadership, but I think it's a great help, both in being able to take actions to improve the church's environmental credentials and in being able to encourage the congregation to make eco-friendly changes in their lifestyle. And then if you want to apply for an award, you need their confirmation of your survey responses. So you don't have to answer all the questions at once. You can go back to the list of categories, and you can select on another one. Now, let's just have a quick, and as I've already mentioned, if you don't have buildings of your own, you don't have to answer the questions. But let's have a quick look at buildings. You can see there are a lot more questions here and a lot more points to be gained. So you're going to have to answer rather more questions fairly well, even to get to bronze. Now, the first 2 or 3 questions, such as this one, require fairly simple answers. They're just sort of yes/no answers. But then you get to questions 7 through 18, and it's much more detailed. It's about the church premises being insulated as follows. And so it might be some walls and some ceilings only, or it might be all lofts and ceilings only. So depending on your answer there, you might get a different score. If it was some walls only, you'd only get 5. So you need a much more detailed knowledge here of your buildings. And just a random one, this is also about double glazed. So you need to know which are double glazed, which maybe have secondary double glazing and so on. So there's a lot more detail here. Then there's some questions about your water use. That's 20 to 23. And then the other questions address other aspects of the building. So things like cleaning products, recycled toilet paper, and do you use environmentally friendly cleaning products? I have a bit of a problem here at home. I'd love to use environmentally friendly cleaning products, but I get Which magazine, and that always seems to say that they're very poor. So if anyone knows really effective cleaning products that are environmentally friendly, you can perhaps let me know in the Q&A afterwards. Okay, let's go back to the list of categories and have a quick look at lifestyle. I think this is the most difficult category for most churches. We've certainly found that in St. Paul's, and I've heard that from elsewhere. So most of the church's questions here, are not about what people do, but about the church encouraging its members to live a more sustainable lifestyle. We can't actually make people do so, but we can encourage them and we can show them how. So question 2, for example, talks about how people travel to church, whether we encourage them to walk or cycle rather than drive. But I think question 1 really is key in this. Do you have an individual or group to champion the cause of the church community becoming more environmentally sustainable? I'll come back to that in a moment. I think you need a group or person who will actually drive forward the eco agenda, someone who will identify the gaps and work out how you can progress. So in fact, in St. Paul's, we're well into silver category in 4 of the categories, but in lifestyle, we're only just bronze. So we're working out what we can do, and we've got a small group who are working out what we can do to move forward to silver. But I think that's really important, as I say, that you have people or small group who are driving this forward. Now, the scores do show you how you can achieve each award level, but they also indicate which actions are the most valuable. So, for instance, if I just quickly go back to buildings, and we go to question 7, you saw that we just got 5 points for some walls only, but if we get walls and loft and ceiling insulated, we get 20 points. So what those scores mean, and different questions have different scores for the answers, is it shows you the actions that will be most valuable for reducing the church's environmental impact and increasing its eco-credentials. Now, you can change your answers at any time and see the corresponding change in your score. So you can play with the answers and see what happens. Well, let's go to question 7. We've said all walls and ceilings, so let's go to something like question 12 about double glazing. You can see, well, if we put in secondary glazing, we get another, I think it's 10 points, but if we put in full double glazing, we get another 20 points. So you can see what would be most valuable in terms of improving your score. Okay, so let's now go back to the Eco Church page and just quickly look at some of these other options. Now, you can view the survey questions. This is a slightly different format from the version you would complete online. It's a printable version. It's a slightly earlier version in the app, but it does show you the questions you need to answer. So you could start on paper and then transfer into the app. Now, there are lots of resources that you hear. So basically, if you scroll down, in each of the 5 categories, there's a number of different presentations you can pick up. So that's the 4th and the 5th categories. So, for instance, we could look at the carbon footprint one. You've got an introductory page, a page that sort of talks about it, just things to think about, with a link to a website here, and then some of the first things you can do. And again, it's got over here, managing your carbon footprint, another website that'll help you. And then more that you can do, and suggests what more you could do. And again, it provides websites that will help you to do that. And in this case, there's about 3 pages of these resources, but it's different amounts in each one. But the format is the same in all of them. Think, do, and do more, and lots of web links. Okay, so let's go back to here. The other one I want to show you briefly is frequently asked questions. Now, there's a video tutorial that explains how to sign up. And basically, if you know the address of your church, you can put that in to register it. So you register yourself and you register your church, and then it explains a bit more. And then there's a whole, what's usually known as FAQ section, explaining how to do it. So if you've got questions, this is the first place to look. Okay, so really, that's the, I'm just going to share one more slide. That's all I wanted to show you. There's obviously a lot more I could say about it, but I think that's probably more than enough for now. But also, hopefully what I've shown you has given you a flavour of how EcoChurch works and demonstrates there's a lot more to it than you might have realised, a lot to think about, potentially a lot to do. So, as I said just now, ideally you'll establish a small team to work together on this. So if by having a team you can share the load, but you can also bounce ideas around, draw on experience in different areas. Now, some of these things may involve expenditure, and then you need to get your treasurer on side. Now, at St Paul's, the treasurer agreed we'd pay for a renewable electricity tariff, as it wasn't too much more expensive than a regular tariff. But we do keep that under review every time we have to renew our contract. So the other thing to say is that we, as in the diocese, Rachel, who's with us on this call, is going to be setting up a mentoring scheme so that churches that have made some progress with EcoChurch can share their experience and knowledge with churches wanting to get started on it or to move forward. So if you email, in the first instance, environment@StAlbans.anglican.org, we'll put you in touch. But also A Rocha has a network of experts such as architects who can provide guidance on specific aspects, such as installing solar panels, but don't expect them to provide professional services for free. But they'll provide you some guidance and point you in the right direction, and probably tell you a bit about what you can do. And also here you've got a reminder of the EcoChurch website address. One other thing to say before I finish. For bronze and silver awards, EcoChurch relies on your honesty in answering the survey questions. So if you apply for a gold award, someone from A Rocha will visit to review your answers before the award is made. But just remember, the most important feature of EcoChurch is the framework and the guidance it provides to making your church ever more environmentally sustainable. Yes, I did mean ever more and not even more. It is an ongoing process. The awards may motivate you, and they will also demonstrate to your local community that the gospel is good news for God's earth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Philip. That's Wonderful. Now, just on the recording, Marie in the chat room has said you could record questions by default, and anyone not wanting their question recorded can then state that. That gets around the issue of my having to ask 44 people for their 44 different screens for consent. Are you all happy with that option? That if you don't want your question recorded, please shout and we will stop the recording. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. Okay. So we will continue then. James is continuing the recording then. Okay. Now, because I've got more than 2 screens worth of people, if you have a question, thank you very much indeed, Philip, for that informative, the biblical background, which should be very useful for us for training in our churches. And thank you for explaining the processes, and that's really helpful. So thank you very much indeed. And Rachel Johnson said the email address to join is in the chat room. So everybody who wants to join the Eco Church mailing, Rachel's put the address in the chat room. Right. Okay. So anyone want to ask a question or share anything? Open forum. It can be somebody's got, maybe we'll have a tip to encourage another church, or somebody might have a question to ask Philip.
Would it be a good idea if people use the reactions button to put their hand up?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But then you'll have to flip between your screens to make sure you
fine.
see the hands up.
If you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button, and there is a raise hand symbol. I've just put it on me, so hopefully you can see that. I don't know where I am actually on the screen.
And Guy has put one up.
Okay, so right, I will come to, okay, I'm going to take down my reaction because I don't need to. Okay, I've just taken it down, lower hand. Okay, let me, right, okay. So if you want to ask a question, Guy, would you like to ask a question? Guy from St John's Methodist Church, Potter's Bar.
Yes. By the way, by raising your hand, I think you automatically go to the top left hand of the screen. To anybody who wants to ask a question, you don't have to look at the second page. But anyway, that's just a side issue. I'm gonna maybe be a bit controversial to start off with, and that's to do with our church buildings. I know a lot of them are very nice, but to be eco, we should really be knocking them down and building them again in an environmental way. We have such big spaces where we waste heat, and it's almost impossible to insulate them. Really, we should be building new buildings.
Ideally, yes.
But knocking down is a bit of a waste of God's resources.
Well, yes, exactly. When we had our big building project at St Paul's just over 10 years ago, we did some demolition, but then we used reused the materials where we could. But I agree, Guy, it is a difficult one, and it's one I've been actually sort of discussing with one of our church wardens at St Paul's, because, as you say, a lot of churches are very high, and all the heat goes up into the roof. Now, there are ways of heating churches where you heat the people rather than the space. The Church of England's environment website actually has some stuff on that, and they run some seminars on heating your church as well. And I can't remember the exact website address. I don't know if Rachel knows it off the top of your head. And this is the Church of England, not the diocese.
I'll look it up, put it in the chat.
Okay,
thank you.
Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Guy, do you want to come back again? Your hand's up.
You'll need to
Yes, I had another quick question actually. What happens once you get your award, and is it reviewed again in a year, 2 years' time? Because one of the questions you highlighted, Philip, was, do you encourage people to walk and cycle to church? I know we had a big thing, we did do that, but I mean, that was about 4 or 5 years ago, but we've not done it since. So I think we should, if you don't carry it on, then losing marks, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, and there's no formal review mechanism. And actually, 2 or 3 of us in the church, my church, have had a go at doing the survey, and we come out with a different score every time. I think it relies on honesty, and I think it relies also on having that group of people who are there to keep pushing things forward. Now, one thing the Church of England is doing, and my apology to most of you, because most of you are not in Church of England churches, but one thing the Church of England requires of every parish church is something called the parish return. And that now includes a very simple measure of carbon footprint. And I think just going through that process, and that's an annual return, I think just going through that process annually enables you to keep, well, forces you really actually to keep reviewing and keep picking up on that. Now, there's then a more detailed carbon footprint tool, which we've just been using in St Paul's, called 360 Carbon. So if you Google 360 Carbon, so that's numbers 360 carbon, all one word, then you can do a much more detailed carbon footprint for the church, and that includes the travel to church survey, and that is something ideally you would do every year. Now, we've just done ours for 2019 because, as I think we all know, 2020 was a rather strange year, and I think 2021 is going to be a rather strange year for that as well. So I'm not sure what we'll do, but ideally, if you do that every year, then I think you can make sure that you're not regressing and keep it in focus.
I mean, we're not, thank you, Philip. Just to say, the Methodist annual returns has a similar question. So we're not all Methodists and we're not all Anglicans around the screen.
I know.
And I'm sure the other churches probably do have similar questions on their annual returns. But yeah, that does does mean that they have to review it once a year, think about it at least once a year. John Sloper has his hand up. And again, I've learned something about this. You're right. It's easy now. I don't have to look around two screens. Okay, John, unmute yourself and speak.
Right, yeah. If all the churches in the UK got gold awards, how much impact would that have on UK's CO2 emissions?
The simple answer is I haven't a clue. It's about more than that as well, because particularly the land part is much more about biodiversity, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the other problems. There are 3 interlinked problems, and they're interlinked, but they are not one and the same, which is climate change, pollution, and biodiversity. And actually, if more people cycled instead of driving, you'd have less pollution as well. So the simple answer to your question is I don't know, but some of the eco-church actions aren't just about CO2.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it would be very useful to have some idea of what impact it would have if everyone did it. We're a lot more convincing.
Well, the problem is churches are all different sizes. You've got a small building, a small church building, somewhere like St Michael's Church in StAlbans is relatively small, and that's just down the road from the cathedral, which is a massive building. So to actually even try and put a number on it would be very difficult, and you'd really have to go through the 360 carbon footprint to do it properly, not just through the eco-church survey. Now, I believe they are trying to, they, as in A Rocha, are trying to encourage eco-churches to do the 360 carbon footprint as well. I don't think awards are conditional on it yet. I think silver may become so, from what I remember of what I've been told informally.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Denise,
sorry.
Rachel, you carry on. Yeah, then Denise has got a hand up. Rachel, you answer. Yeah, go on then.
Hey, sorry.
Sorry, which Rachel?
Your pardon.
Oh,
Can I reply? I mean, to John Sloper.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
mean, we can do a bit of guessing on this ourselves, can't we? Roughly, what's the population of people who go to church in this country? 10% and
No,
how much less?
5% probably.
Okay. Well, I mean, Well, there's a number to start with. So if that number of extra people are what was your criterion? Was it biodiversity, John? Or was carbon?
CO2, no, it was CO2.
I was trying to get an idea of the global impact of this scheme if it was taken up by 100%.
The UK impact, not the global impact.
Yeah, sorry,
Well, it would be,
impact.
yeah, UK.
I mean,
on the narrow energy front, I know the biodiversity things, so I've been interested in wildlife all my life, and many people are. But I'm interested into just get an idea of the scale of this project and what it could potentially achieve.
I think,
well, I mean,
if we're going to go through the calculations now, then I think we might be using time, if you don't mind me saying it, that other people may have other questions. We could try and work it out now, but I think we'd be here a long time trying to get a real handle on it. The other thing is
throwing out an idea, wasn't I?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you know, let's think on
you
it.
Started the calculation with the percentage.
Yeah, okay, there is an answer in the chat room. Okay, we've got a question, hand up from Denise Willingham now.
It was more a comment, really, sort of following on from that last thing. If we looked at the global engagements and participation, you know, and community and global participation, if the 5% of people who go to church were all to, you know, get more engaged in terms of writing to politicians, local councils and so on, saying we want more cycleways or want the country to look at green energy and so on, I think that is also something that could be taken into account in terms of the impact of this this initiative. Really, it's not just about the carbon footprint, it's about the impact we could have as a community of people lobbying for change.
Absolutely. You probably saw I put a thumbs up on that, and it was something I was discussing with someone as well just earlier today. I really do believe that writing to our MPs and asking them also to forward our letters to the relevant department is something we can all do. And I live, as it happens, I live in Hitchin and Harpenden constituency, and I haven't yet managed to make contact with other people around here who perhaps could go and, you know, we could perhaps go and meet with the MFL Army together. But a lot of you I know are in StAlbans, and it'd be great if some of you perhaps got together to go and actually meet with David Cooper, who I think is very open to the whole environmental agenda. James, I think, has got a question.
Yes, well, it's a comment, really. I want to go back to John Sloper's thought about how much difference is it all going to make. And I'm going to pour a bit of cold water on it, because actually there's this thing called the Jevons paradox, which Mike Berners-Lee highlighted in his book, There's No Planet B. And the Jevons paradox basically says that improved energy efficiency generally increases the overall consumption of energy by making an activity cheaper and thus more scalable or accessible. And this actually was first proposed back in the, well, first observed in the 19th century when coal efficiency jumped, and people just used more because they could. They could afford to. And so what do people do? We've got wonderful diesel engines. And so what do? They just buy bigger cars because they can spend the same amount of fuel driving bigger cars around. What do people do with LEDs? They start to have more and more bulbs outside their houses and all the rest of it. Just as examples, what do people do when they insulate their house and save some heating money? They fly off to have a holiday overseas. So overall, the actual energy saved by all these energy saving things doesn't actually help. What we actually need to do is stop using carbon and find non-carbon fuel sources, such as the nuclear power that my friend Simon was talking about yesterday, but also safe nuclear power, etc., but also more renewables. All these energy saving things actually, I'm afraid, don't make much difference. They might save the money, but you've got to bank that. People don't. On average, as a society, as a world, as a system, we don't bank it. And that's, you know, read the book. I'm very sorry, but that seems to be the fact.
Human nature, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
why are we
kind of the level,
don't spend a fortune on double glazing a church?
that's kind of the level of campaigning that we're at, really, because you're describing the average person, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm describing an entire system, the world.
Okay.
Nothing to do with individuals.
And
It's
we're
actually the way the
Christians, so
world
we
is.
view it differently.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying.
We've got a hand up with David Carter now.
Who's muted?
That's it. Hi, it's price that discourages consumption. I remember Enoch Powell, of all people, saying that years ago. If you put the price up enough, people will stop using it. Unfortunately, it often has bad side effects for those people who are on lower incomes. But certainly, if you don't put the price up, consumption will increase. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Guy's got his hand up again.
Sorry, yes. I just wanted to make another comment about it, environmentalism. I'm fortunate enough that I've worked in a company that has always thought about the environment. And back in the 1980s, we even employed someone just to look after the environment and encourage us as employees to be more environmentally aware. And it comes back to the 3 tenets of reduce, reuse, and recycle. But the main one is reduce. We've just got to reduce our consumption and as James says, not use carbon.
Yes.
We have to make do with less.
Okay, and now we've got.
Rachel's putting her hand up physically rather than with her.
Okay, Rachel, do you want to respond then? Peter Barlow's got his hand up.
Well, it was just to say that the difference between this scheme, I understand, and other environmental actions that people could take, however good they might be, the difference with this scheme is that at the centre of it is worship and teaching. That's what makes it different, and that's what's going to inform our actions and make the change that we all hope will help to make the difference.
Thank you,
That's
Rachel.
what's special about it.
Yeah, no, that's Rachel. Yeah, that's the Gandhi. We must be the change that we want to see in the world. Peter Barlow.
I just really wanted to pick up on the previous discussion about LEDs and stopping using power, etc., etc. I've been involved in a couple of energy reduction schemes, and yes, changing to LEDs is significant, but also significant is changing the means by which lights come on. If you can get rid of switches and put in presence detectors or some means other than that, that can make a stunning difference. And I've been able to prove that on a couple of occasions. And just as an anecdote, we did at the Whitechapel Mission, where I am also a trustee, over about 3 months, change from all incandescent bulbs and fluorescent tubes to LED lights, but all with automatic switching where it was absolutely possible. And for our benefit, for our reward, we had a visit from the police in conjunction with the electricity board, who thought we bridged the meter because our consumption had dropped from £6,000 a year to just £2,000 just by doing those 2 things. And I think that's worth bearing in mind.
Thank you, Peter. James, have you got your hand up still? Have you just not put it down?
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Any other comments or questions? I think Denise's I mean, I have to say, I really like, obviously, we can talk about a drop in the ocean about some of these things, but it's also about being a symbol for change, and also about, as Denise said, campaigning and also having a.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Andrew Prout. He's showing us his face now. Here he is. Andrew, unmute yourself, though. Unmute yourself, Andrew.
No, thank you. I've been listening with intent. It's been a really good evening. I wanted to ask if A Rocha, COP26 is approaching. It's going to be a very significant event. Is there any plans from A Rocha to be involved with that, or is there anything in the pipeline?
I think there's a lot of Christian organisations like A Rocha actually working together towards COP26. I'm afraid that because I've been so focused on St Albans Sustainability Festival, I haven't really caught up on what's happening with COP26. So I think A Rocha are in there with other organisations as well. There's Climate Sunday, and there's going to be a big sort of gathering in Glasgow Cathedral on the 5th of September in the afternoon. That's going to be online, I believe, that really is pulling together all the churches that have taken up and done something towards COP26. And then there's a pilgrimage of young people starting in the West Country, I think right down in Cornwall, passing not far from here, so it's coming towards London, almost to London, then heading north up to Glasgow. So I think there's a lot happening in the Christian world. As Rachel's just put in the chat, Climate Sunday Special Service, September the 5th, will pull together. It's moved on. I'll just find again what Rachel. Yes, Climate Sunday Special Service, September the 5th, will draw together all the pledges made by churches, and that's the afternoon of September the 5th. It's from Glasgow, I think Glasgow Cathedral, and it's in the afternoon.
And Chris Esdale's also put some resources in the chat room. And
Thank you.
And so go in the chat. Alan Smith has got his hand up, but I didn't see it, but now it's a yellow hand and I can see you, Alan. Unmute yourself and speak, Alan, from Luton.
Hello, yes, I wonder whether A Rocha or any other organisation has any input into other faiths and what they're doing, because that may not be a major thing in St Albans, I'm not sure, but it is in Luton.
Can you give me 10 seconds? I've been asked to put the light on in this room and I'm going to do that. Hang on. The answer, Alan, is yes, very subtly. There exists an eco-synagogue, and I think there's an eco-mosque scheme as well.
Right.
Within A Rocha?
Right, well, not A Rocha sort of keeps its, for those, A Rocha sort of keeps its Christian head down, and they're not quite the same survey questions. But yes, the answer is there is something out there that developed from the eco-church scheme for synagogues and mosques, not as far as I know for Hindu temples, etc., etc. But here in St Albans, of course, we have a mosque, and at least one mosque, and we have 2 synagogues. I have a tiny bit of contact with Adam Zagoria Moffat at the one of the synagogues, and
Adam's Mazorti Synagogue in
Mazorti, yes.
Yeah.
And I think an email to him I sent a few weeks ago has got lost in his spam folder, but I'm actually trying to get in touch with him to see whether that's the synagogue might take up the Eco Synagogue award.
And in Luton we have at least 40 mosques.
That few? Sorry, I'm being sarcastic.
Well, there's 2 on the Hatfield Road in St Albans.
There's 2, is it? Thank you. Yes, the one up the road from St Paul's. Yes, I think I did know there's another one
further down near Hatfield Road. Okay, right. Okay, well, that was a good question, Alan, especially from different contexts. John's got his hand up again, John Sloper.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone had come across a book called Shaping Tomorrow. It was written by a group of Methodist scientists around about 1980 under the leadership of Bill Gowland at Luton Industrial College. And it covered the ethics and future of nuclear energy. A chap called Henry Disney from the Nature Conservation did something on nature conservation and stewardship of creation. And I was involved because I wrote a bit on ethical side of medical advances. But it covered a lot of these things, nearly 40 years ago now.
So and no one was listening then.
Yeah.
At least Christians weren't.
But it was done as a study aid for groups, churches to study. And I know I spoke at a few groups at that time, and then it seemed to fade out and people lost interest.
Right, thank you, John. You can put that, always put that in the chat room. Alan, you've still got your hand up. Is that do you want to come back with something?
And
No,
You're very welcome to.
no, he's put his hand down and muted himself.
What would be quite interesting, just it's a bit difficult around the Zoom screen, but if anybody could just say whether their churches have, or are sort of where churches have actually got from the point of view, is there anybody here who's got gold award? I do know a church that's got a gold award. It's nothing to do with me, so I can boast of it. Stratford-upon-Avon Methodist Church. A very good friend of mine is the minister there, but when she got appointed, they had already practically done everything to get the gold award. So she said she couldn't take the credit either. But so if anybody wants to know, they've got a very good green group. If anybody wants any tips, Stratford-upon-Avon Methodist Church is a place to go for a trip. But not in your car, of course. You go virtually.
Or cycle.
Or cycle, yeah. Yeah.
Well, you could take the train, that's better than the car, but you'd have to go into London and out again.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Marie's got her hand up.
For Paul.
Yeah, hello there. It's Paul, actually. Marie's my wife, but anyway. I just want to say I'm very much behind this. And I do think everybody needs to do their bit, and everybody needs to set an example, and you know, and that's very important. But one of my concerns is that it can be very easy to make a positive change in one area without thinking about the implications of what happens elsewhere. And we see that certainly in various areas of government, where different departments will be working to their own agenda. They might be doing very well, and it has a negative effect elsewhere. So the idea, I mean, changing from tungsten lights to LED generally is a positive thing. However, you are still scrapping something. You've still got to dispose of something. You've still got to make something new. So we should all be just beware that when you read headlines, you need to possibly delve in a bit further.
So sometimes the solution is to keep something going as long as it works and then replace it when it stops working. The other thing was, about 20 years ago when I moved here, my then electricity supplier was giving away first generation energy saving bulbs, which were those little compact fluorescent lights. Now mine just sort of, I put a few of those in where they gave enough light, and of course they take a while to reach full brightness, so I didn't put them everywhere. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I replaced them with LEDs, but I used the Free Cycle website to offer those first generation energy saving bulbs, and someone took them. So someone else got the benefit of them, not as good as getting new LEDs, but better than incandescent lights. So yes, I did the replacement, but I didn't throw away the first generation CFLs, I gave them away. So you can think about that, you know, transferring it on to someone else who maybe can use it. Certainly if you're, you know, if it's something moderately energy saving, or as I say, you know, wait till it breaks down. I replace my car about every 10 years. This is going to be a slightly longer gap because I'm waiting for a battery electric vehicle with a decent range. At the moment, they don't have quite the range I'd want.
I think it can be very, very difficult. It's very easy to procrastinate and not do anything.
Yes.
Sometimes a decision is going to be made, and it might be the wrong decision. And I think we've got to accept that not everything that's done is going to have the right end.
Yes, indeed.
But hopefully, the majority of what is done is positive, and just and it shouldn't put us off. If not everything is as good as it might be.
I agree that doing something is probably better than doing nothing. But yeah, I think you've raised a very good point that not everything we do is simple and straightforward. You know, the sort of rare earths that are needed by, for example, electric cars and their batteries, and where they come from and how they're mined. It's not as straightforward as you might think, replacing a internal combustion engine vehicle with a battery electric vehicle.
No, that's right. And as far as nuclear power is concerned, of course, I still don't think the problem of the waste disposal has been sorted out, has it? That is still an ongoing problem.
That was last night. That was
last night. Yes, you should have listened to me last night. No, actually, not listen to me. Listen to Simon Johnson last night. I just hosted that one.
We can give you a copy of the YouTube link to that one, though, Philip, can't we?
Yes. Whoever was at the meeting should have had an email with the link to the video, or if they haven't
put it on this chat room, could you?
We could put it. I can't.
I'd have to go. Oh, I can. Yes, I can do it, but I think I'm going to have to go for smaller screen.
You can ask. If not, you can ask. My email address is in the chat room. You can ask me, and we can get you.
Give me a moment. I'll see if I can find the relevant email.
But yeah, that was last night's talk. So 24 hours too late for that.
Yes, I'll see if I.
Okay, well, while you're fine, if not, they can contact us afterwards, and we can get it to you. My email address is in the chat room. If you ask me, we'll get it to you afterwards. Right, okay, well, I've got Ros Hancock had her hand up. It's gone down now.
She was clapping.
I just wanted to say that it's really difficult to get that narrow line between encouraging people and making people feel guilty for what they're not doing. And what we really have to be careful of is that we encourage and persuade rather than make people feel bad for the things that they're not doing. I'm not saying, that we shouldn't. I mean, I'm all behind all this completely, but I think it can be quite difficult sometimes to get in exactly the right place. When people go shopping and they have to think about whether it's fair trade, whether it's organic, whether it's cheap enough for them to be able to buy. There's so many things to think about, and people have to have the time to be able to do all that. It's not always as simple as obviously we know it's not simple, but we just need to get that fine line.
Okay, we've got Andrew Johnson is waving his hand at me. Andrew.
Yes, Ros has covered more or less the point I was going to make, really, but I was going to ask what the effect is on small country churches with relatively few members who are doing good work in their local communities and have not got people that are particularly au fait or good at doing what we've been talking about this evening, and the possible effects of the stress on them of thinking they ought to be doing something, and they've got a league table almost with other churches in their areas. And has any thought been given to the fact this puts an awful lot of pressure on people, whereas the churches in StAlbans have got a pool of very clever, very skilled people and loads of money, but other people haven't?
It's a good point. It's a fair point. I don't think you should necessarily see it as a league table. I was being slightly tongue-in-cheek when I talked about it being competitive. Sorry?
I'm talking about what they would look at it like, not us.
Yes, but I think, as I say, if you focus on it being providing a framework and showing where you can get most value, rather than necessarily the award and the points. I did actually speak at a church that was, although it was nominally in a village in Buckinghamshire, the actual church was about a half a mile up the hill, well out of, and it sort of felt like a rural, very rural church. And they certainly were very receptive to what I had to say, and I was able to point them to some resources. I think they were concerned about heating their church because it's only used for sort of, one service or two services a week. And I think they were concerned about heating it. And I was able to point them to some of the resources, I think, on the Church of England website. So I think it's a case of doing what you can and not feeling guilty about what you can't, and deciding, what you feel you need to be doing.
Well, I hope people are counselling them on that very point then, to make sure that they are feeling like that.
May I say, the league tables are could be a nuisance in the circumstance that you're suggesting, Andrew. And what occurred to me is I did hear Philip say something about one of the points that is encouraging people to have discussions and to think of their own personal green footprint, for want of a better word, as well as the contributing to the church's one. And I think in a small fellowship such as you describe, Andrew, that would be more of an emphasis for a small community.
Thank you, Jane.
Well, it depends on the individuals in the church, doesn't it? What their range of skills and knowledge is, and how they can cope with the pressures that they feel they're under to deal with this sort of thing. And the church down the road would have a different group of people who would react in a different way.
And whether we can campaign and influence friends and neighbours.
You've got to be very careful not to assume that they are receiving it in a way which is helpful to them.
I think the mentoring scheme can probably help there, if rather than churches just doing their own thing, they're actually prepared to help those that are further on. If they could help and encourage those churches that want to get started or aren't so far on.
Rachel's got her hand up. Okay, Rachel.
Oh, I was just going to say that churches are all so different, and most churches have got strengths that actually they don't realise. So sometimes you don't realise just what you're good at, and then as Philip says, the point of having a mentor scheme is that you can share your strengths with others, and churches can work together in clusters ecumenically as well to support themselves within their community and share the expertise and resources and be encouraging to one another. It does seem to work. So does that help?
Well, let's hope that happens in the majority of places rather than an assumption being made that it happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping this mentor scheme will do just that, so that people aren't left floundering and feeling let down by the process. And it should be affirmative and encouraging.
Can you just say, Rachel, confirm what I'm thinking, that the mentoring scheme isn't only for Anglicans, it's just that you're organising it out of the diocese, but any church can be part of the mentoring scheme, and you want people to contact you if they're willing, if they're in churches that are willing to mentor as well as wanting to be mentored.
Yeah, be great. Yes, please.
Okay, that's good. Rachel, Jane, you've still got your hand up. Have you got another comment or question you want to ask?
Haven't I got it down? I have tried to.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't want, if you've got another. Rachel, Rachel, do you want to, we're coming to the end. I can't see anybody else's hand. No one else waving at me. I'll just check on the other screen, and no other hands up. Rachel, do you want to, you can tell them all who you are and you can share what you wanted to share. I know there's quite a lot of stuff in the chat room, but not everybody might have had access to that, but there is quite a lot of information, including answers to the nuclear question that Paul was asking. They're all in the chat room. But Rachel, you have the floor. I'll let you have the floor now because you wanted to make an announcement or two.
Well, thank you. Yes, and just to say a huge thank you to Philip for this evening and for the preparation that he's put into this evening, and some really interesting discussion that's come from the session. So thank you. So there's another event tomorrow as part of the festival, which the Cathedral have asked me to mention, which is a chance to meet two fantastic speakers online. Hannah Malcolm, and who was the Theology Slam winner last year, and Dr. Anderson Jeremiah are in conversation inspired by a book, Words for a Dying World, Stories of Grief and Courage from the Global Church. So do go along to that one if you have time. And there are other events being put on by local churches, and I'm sure they'd all be glad if you're the support. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think, as I say, there are a few comments in the chat room and a few addresses that and resources that Rachel and others, Chris Esbell has put some in that you might want to take down to go to the chat room before we close. But yeah, as I say, I just don't want to shut anybody off, but I can't see any other hands up. So thank you, everybody. Lots of interesting comments provoked by, thank you very much, Philip, for your your talk this evening, which this all began partly with the churches of the St Albans and Welling Circuit have been asked by two people who are around the screen to an environmental proposal that they were given last autumn, and they got to reply. Each church in the circuit, there's 10 of them, have got to reply by June, the 15th or 16th, as to what it is that they have done to improve their environmental credentials. So that began there, and then we decided that Marlborough Road would host it and open it out to the St Albans Sustainable Festival, SustFest, and invite anybody who might want to come and hear Philip. So we're very grateful, Philip, for your talk. And it was to kind of, we were hoping that people would feel encouraged, as well as kind of help to start them on the journey and to encourage them on continuing the journey. Philip, are there any churches in St Albans who've got the Gold Award?
Not that I'm aware. I think there are a number that are at bronze. I can't even remember. There are churches not so far away that are on silver. Actually, if I just show you one more thing, yep. On the, if I can find the right, if I can share my screen and go back. If you go to the, so hopefully you're seeing this now. If you go to the about, and you go to eco church locations map, you can have a look and see which churches it should eventually populate. You can apply filters. So if you want to look at which Methodist churches have awards, and you can zoom in. Let's control scroll. Right. Okay. So if they're blue, it simply means they are registered. If they're brown, it means they've got bronze. Strathmore Avenue Methodist Church appears to be silver in Luton or thereabouts. Have we still got Alan with us? Whether he knows.
Yes, I'm still here.
Do you know Strathmore Avenue Methodist Church?
Oh, yes, I know it well.
They appear to be silver. So
that's partly because they've got quite a big grounds, which
right.
They let the groundworks use for community projects. I'm
right.
Community worker at Strathmore.
Right. Okay. And Harlington Methodist Church. Actually, I've been past Harlington Methodist Church. This was north of Luton, and they very proudly display both bronze and silver plaques on their front door or next to the front door. So as you go past, you can see that they've got both the bronze and then the silver award. And so it sort of shouts out to anyone walking past. We care for God's creation. The gospel is good news for this earth.
Brilliant. Can I just say that Natalie is just going to give a tip as to how you can save the chat room, as to how, so that if you haven't had time to write down the links. Natalie, would you like to explain this to us? Because we might all be having another lesson tonight.
So if you've got the chat on the right hand side of your screen, so it's vertical so that you're seeing all the messages. At the bottom, just next to where you could type in a question, there's 3 little dots that if you hover over it, it says more. If you click on that, it then says save chat, and it will save it into a Zoom folder in your documents file.
Right.
Thank you, Natalie. I'd forgotten that that's how you do it.
These, I, like you, had never even heard of Zoom a year ago. So, you know, it's just a crazy, crazy world.
Just when we thought we'd mastered everything, shows we can all learn things, Natalie.
Oh, yes.
Very much.
There's always more. Just as you could do more on the environmental front, you could do more on understanding the software.
Well, everybody else around the screen might have known that, but I thought Natalie put it in the chat room and I thought it was worth her telling, because it is quite difficult when you're listening to somebody to scribble down something that's in the chat room. So there you go.
Especially if they go on, the link becomes like a whole page.
Mm.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Natalie. Oh, not only have we had a really good environmental evening tonight, we've also had a Zoom lesson. So thank you. Right. Well, anyhow, and Philip, yeah, very grateful to you, because I obviously didn't know when we asked you to do this evening that you were going to be having hip surgery. So I'm glad.
What did I?
I'm glad you haven't had to scramble on the floor with your router this evening. That would have been most unfortunate to for you to have had to have done that. So we're very glad that you, as I say, you haven't had to do that, and you. Excellent evening, and thank you very much indeed. And I'm just sorry that I was hoping every church in St Albans would be here to hear you tonight, Philip, but perhaps they've had too much else to do in the SustFest calendar. So, right, I'm just about, if you would, we're going to end with a short prayer, but if we could just unmute ourselves and thank Philip very much for his here tonight. Let's show our appreciation for Philip's presentation and all the effort.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, Philip.
Tense for everybody. Yeah. So any worries about the movements? Yeah.
Can somebody Zoom themselves, mute themselves who's speaking? Right, okay, I'm just going to end with a prayer. Is there anybody else who wants to say or do anything before I close with a prayer? Right, okay, no more announcements, no more questions. We'll just end with a prayer. Thank you all very much for coming. We did have, at one time, we had 45 different PCs open. So that was very good. Thank you very much. And we hope that you'll come and to some of our future thinking events, whether it's Sustainable St Albans or not. But the catalogue is full of events you can do for the next 2 weeks for Sustainable St Albans. So as we are a church gathering this evening, I'm going to just end with a prayer. May God, who established the dance of creation, who marveled at the lilies of the field, who transforms chaos to order, lead us to transform our lives and the church to reflect God's glory in God's creation. And we ask you, O God, to bless each one of us here. Bless all the church communities that are represented, and may we all, in whatever ways are appropriate for our context, care for you, God, for your creation, O Lord, and be good stewards of all that you have entrusted to us. So bless us this night and always. Amen.
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 Okay, well, thank you very much, Rosemary, for inviting me to do this for you.